Hi everyone, it's Katie back with another episode of my vlog, and it's the end of the week, so it is time for the Cinema Club Sunday Roundup. You guys may remember if you watched last week, we were planning on watching The Addams Family from 1991 as part of our Mother's Day viewing. That was an interesting one. I had not seen it since it came out. I had really fond memories of it. And the one thing I remembered about it that kind of stuck in my craw was I felt like the plot was a little bit thin compared to how good the rest of the movie was. And sure enough, on rewatching, 30 years later or whatever it is now, same thoughts. It's a super fun movie, super great performances by everybody. Of course, everybody wants to be part of the Addams family and live in that amazing mansion and be part of their insane kooky and mysterious and spooky lifestyle. But the actual plot of the Addams Family movie from 1991 is just, it's really pretty weak. And I remember way back when it first came out thinking, it's kind of funny because this might just work better as a TV show. I'm a huge fan of the original show from the 60s. And the thing about it as a show is the same thing as the thing about it as a series of comics, which is it's a setup. It's not a plot in and of itself. It's this hilarious, great, outrageous setup for a whole bunch of other plots to unfold. So when they made the movie and they had the plot be, this Uncle Fester impersonator is trying to work his way into the family to get at the Addams Family money, it's just... it's not the greatest plot. But other than that piece of criticism, we loved everything else about it. Of course, the kids adored it. The kids loved all of the different characters. And of course, everybody identified with a different character as their favorite. And it was really fun to talk about, what would I do if I was Cousin It? Or what would I do if I was Thing? Or what would I do if I was Lurch? Or, of course, Morticia is my favorite as the mom of the family and as someone who admires a beautiful, spooky lady. I've always loved her. In fact, I had Morticia on my name list for, if I've told the guys, if I had had 3 daughters when I was a obnoxious teenager, I decided I was going to name them Natasha, Morticia, and Cruella. So I guess it's a good thing I didn't have 3 daughters, or we'd have some people saddled with some pretty funny names. But overall, a pretty good movie. Like I said, my complaint about the plot being a little thin notwithstanding, really fun, really stands up well over time. All the special effects look really good. The one super dated thing though is as soon as the end credits roll, you get this Addams Family rap by MC Hammer. Oh, excuse me, Hammer only. He's like dropped the MC at that point. And that's terrible, and it's very early 90s. But other than the rap and the thin plot, I would say totally recommended movie, totally fun. Anyone who likes anything mysterious, spooky, kooky, ooky, The Addams Family, and love this movie. You should watch it. It's great. Now I have to actually go backwards and admit that I forgot to review a movie on last week's Cinema Club Sunday Roundup that we had watched the week before. And I kind of can't believe I forgot to review it because it was kind of more emotional than I thought it was going to be for me. We actually watched Castaway from 2000, of course, starring Tom Hanks and a volleyball as a guy cast away on an island who lives there for 4 years by himself with only the natural resources of the island and the random boxes that fell out of the FedEx plane that he was on that crashed to survive with. I chose this movie because we've been trying to do this thing where we replace the outdoor school that the kids used to go to that's been canceled because of coronavirus. So every week on Thursday, we try to watch a movie that kind of somehow deals with something nature-y or survival-y or something like that. So I chose Castaway because of that. I really wanted to show the kids okay, what is this guy gonna do to, survive on this island? And I thought of it sort of through that lens. Interestingly, I found it to be a very emotional movie for me because part of what I've been working on in the stroke dimension, actually with my therapist, is sort of, she always asks me, what does something look like when I talk about feelings? She says, what does that look like? Because she's really tuned into the fact that I'm a very visual person. And so I keep using these water metaphors and boat metaphors and being stranded out in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight in a little tiny boat as my metaphor for kind of what it feels like to be in the stroke dimension. It's like adrift at sea with nowhere to really tie the boat up, right? And I was shocked at how much Tom Hanks's actual stay on the Castaway Island felt metaphorically like the journey to the stroke dimension for my family. It's like we're living on this weird island called the stroke dimension. And other people kind of like come by on their boats once in a while, but mostly it's just us kind of hanging out here and being trapped and doing this thing. And when we re-enter the normal world in the future at some point, I'm sure it's going to feel disorienting, like it does feel disorienting at the end of Castaway when Tom Hanks's character finally re-enters the normal world. I mean, spoiler alert, he makes it off the island. But it was really interesting to me. It was a very emotional journey for me, much more so than I expected it to be. The movie is solid. It holds up really well. I would say my criticism of Castaway is it is too long, and most of the too long part is at the end of the movie after he gets rescued and he tries to make his way back into his life and what that reentry is like. And of course it's difficult because other people have moved on without him. His fiance has married somebody else and started a family because she thinks that he's dead. All of these things, they spend a lot of time on it at the end of the movie. I mean a lot. It's like you could cut a whole half hour out of the end of the movie. It would still be a movie-length movie, and it wouldn't have all this just really long, emotional, drawn-out stuff at the end of it. Or leave the movie the same length, but let's have another half hour of him just adventuring around and doing his own thing on the island. Because I think that's what most people are coming to Castaway to watch, is Tom Hanks on an island by himself, not Tom Hanks trying to get back together with his estranged fiance who he hasn't seen in 4 years. Of course, Wilson the volleyball is a very important character in the movie and in the story. And of course, we all got emotional when Wilson swam away, or, Wilson's death, as James called it in the movie. He started crying and was like, I didn't think I would be crying about a ball. And I was like, I know, right, buddy? Like, he's a total character in the movie. So we loved it. It was great. Again, a little too long at the end, but, I don't know, ignore that part or something. You can just turn it off when he comes off the island. No, you shouldn't turn it off when he comes off the island. But of course, the on the island part is the best part. Interesting piece of trivia that I learned when I was researching about that movie. Apparently FedEx paid nothing for the gigantic product placement of themselves in the movie. What they did do was they let the producers of the movie use a bunch of FedEx planes and facilities for free without having to pay for it. But man, it's like, well, kind of an ad for FedEx, kind of not, right? But I was surprised to learn that they didn't pay anything for that much screen time in a movie. The other interesting thing that I learned was they did a production hiatus in the middle of the movie. They filmed the first part, and then they just took off for an entire year so that Tom Hanks could lose all that weight and grow his hair and beard longer, so that he could be the scraggly version of himself at the end of the movie, which is pretty cool. I always appreciate when an actor goes through a pretty extreme physical transformation for a role, and putting the entire movie production on hiatus for a year so that he could do that character transformation is pretty interesting. And, there's some method acting there, right? So recommended. This interestingly was the first Tom Hanks movie that we viewed as Cinema Club. Sean is not a fan of Tom Hanks, and so it's kind of funny whenever I suggest movies that he's in, Sean's just kind of like, oh, I don't know. But there are some good ones out there. So I'm sure we will be watching some more Tom Hanks movies, if not in the near future, in the future of Cinema Club. The next night after that, not the next night at all because it was a week later, it was Sean's pick, and he picked Faust by Jan Svankmajer. I believe this is Sean's favorite Svankmajer movie. I'm just Alice forever for me, but again, I don't like the concept of favorites, so you can love every Jan Svankmajer movie. This is, of course, the story of a man who makes a deal with the devil that he then tries to get out of because he doesn't like the terms of the deal as much as he thought he did when he got into the deal in the first place. It's told in Jan Svankmajer's amazing, unique visual style where he's mixing live action footage and stop motion animation. And in Faust, he also gets into puppets. And it's very cool to see the mix of those three different storytelling media coming together. He also messes a lot with scale in this one, which he does in Alice also, with the whole growing larger and smaller. But like the puppets come at all these different scales. Some of the puppets are man-sized and some of them are like, you know, little guys. And sometimes the little puppets are climbing on the big puppets, and sometimes people are turning into puppets, and sometimes puppets are doing things even if they don't have a puppeteer's hands attached to them. It is visually a delight. The story is great. You know, it's a Jan Svankmajer movie. What more do you want? We're huge fans around here, and we really wanted to show this one to James, our youngest son, because he's been getting into puppetry and animation recently, and so we're trying to kind of, you know, fire his brain by getting all these different really interesting to watch things in front of him that are going to inspire him to then push his art that he's making into a whole other land. Unfortunately, we watched a totally untranslated version. There's not that much dialogue in Faust, but there's enough that you should find either the English dub or something that's subtitled. If you're going to watch it for the first time, it's a little rough, obviously, if you can't understand what the characters are saying at all. We actually pulled up a couple of plot summaries, and I was reading them to James during the dialogue part so that he could keep up with what was going on in the story. It worked okay, but definitely, you know, if you're an English speaker, get yourself an English version of it if you're going to watch it. Totally recommended for art weirdos, anyone who's into the devil or the concept of the Faustian bargain. Totally recommended. It's just great. The night after we watched Faust, it was my pick, and I have been on this mission to get the kids into Western movies for a while. And so I said, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to start Westerns, and we're going to go way back to 1939 and watch Stagecoach, directed by John Ford. This is John Wayne's breakout role. He was kind of an unknown before this movie. In fact, he got second billing on the movie under, I'm totally blanking out on her name. The woman who plays Dallas, the prostitute in the movie, she was a better known actress at the time the movie came out than John Wayne was. Of course, this movie just launched his career, and John Wayne became, you know, the guy, the Duke that everyone knows him as, famous for Westerns. So he's quite young in Stagecoach. It is a story of a stagecoach journey with, I think it's 9 different people who are riding the stagecoach for one reason or another, very different sorts of people with different personalities and different motivations. None of them should be riding a stagecoach together, but they are. And they're traveling across, I think it's Apache territory. I can't remember which tribe. It is a product of its time, so it's a little bit racist in its depiction of the Native Americans, but it's a great film. It is filmed out in Monument Valley, Arizona, so it really, as an early Western, sets the tone visually for what Westerns look like. And that's really interesting. It's also shot, you know, at the movie ranch in Hollywood. So they kind of like went back and forth in between the location shots out in Monument Valley and then the stuff that they did in Hollywood. They blend them together pretty well, though. There's a couple of places where you can really see it. But for the most part, they actually did a pretty great job of utilizing these different shooting situations and blending them together in a way that doesn't like stick out like a sore thumb that you're going, oh man, that looks so cheesy. Super exciting, great story, great acting. It's a classic. In my research about this one, I learned apparently it was one of Orson Welles' favorite movies, and he considered it to be a perfect piece of filmmaking, and he watched it something like 40 times in preparation for making Citizen Kane, which is nuts to me, but okay. So that's pretty interesting to learn. And the kids were so into it, and I'm so pleased that they're so into it, that we decided we're going to do a new thing as part of Cinema Club, which is called Western Wednesdays, that we're going to be watching a Western on Wednesdays. Hey, that's pretty obvious, right? So I made a list of some of my favorite crucial Westerns that I think everyone should see. I decided to cap it at about 13 just because I could just keep adding to this thing forever and ever. So I think for the next 13 weeks, that's what we're going to follow. I'll go ahead and I'll put our list down in the description below. But next week on Wednesday, we are going to be watching High Noon. So if you guys want to join us and follow along, got to watch Stagecoach in the next few days and then watch High Noon on Wednesday. And then Next week on Cinema Club Sunday Roundup, I will do my high noon review and we can talk about what the Western movie will be for the following week. So I'm super excited about that and exploring the whole Western genre with the kids because I'm a big fan of Westerns in all their different forms. And there's a bunch of different forms that Westerns can take. And I like the way that different directors and different producers have kind of pushed the genre into different directions. Over history. I think it's pretty cool. So, Cinema Club Western Wednesdays. Let's see. The next night after that, we actually wound up watching Murder on the Orient Express from 1974, directed by Sidney Lumet, of course, from the Agatha Christie novel. This movie is incredible. If you've never seen it, or if for some reason you have seen the remake but have not seen the original, I highly encourage you to watch the original Murder on the Orient Express. It is... It's just great. It's got this huge cast, all these giant stars in the movie. I mean, it's like Sean Connery, Vanessa Redgrave, Ingrid Bergman, Anthony Perkins, John Gielgud. I mean, it's just, there's so many people. And they're all great in the roles that they have. It's incredibly well written because, of course, it's written by Agatha Christie. And it's just a great murder mystery. It is also pretty cool because it is one of these movies that takes place in a very limited environment. It all takes place on the train. I guess at the very beginning, they haven't gotten on the train yet. But once they get on the train, the whole thing takes place on the train. And I'm always a fan of that kind of limited environment movie where it's just very much trapped in one little sort of setting and it doesn't really go anywhere else, and it's all based on how the actors handle the material and how well they can convince me that we're actually, going on this journey, this train ride together. And this is a great one. Even though it's got tons of characters in it, it's not hard to follow who's who. And by the time we get to the end, when Poirot, the detective on board the train who has to solve the mystery, reveals his solution to the puzzle, you've gone on a thoroughly enjoyable ride on this the train ride and the movie. I don't want to say too much more because it's a murder mystery, so of course it's got little twists and turns and things that you wouldn't expect. And if I say too much, then you know too much. But Murder on the Orient Express, great film, great cast, great acting, great set design, and it's set in the 1930s, and it's just, it's gorgeous. So if any of those things I just said ring your bells, definitely check that one out. We finished the week actually last night. It was Henry's pick, and he took a trip through the horror side of my watch list and picked out Deep Star 6 from 1989, directed by Sean S. Cunningham, who is the guy who directed the first Friday the 13th movie and a bunch of other horror movies. And so this was his take on the underwater action sci-fi horror thing that was apparently very popular in 1989. This is the same year that Abyss came out, the same year that Leviathan came out, and there were a couple of other underwater adventure movies. They all feel very similar to each other, which is unfortunate because it kind of, I think, you get audience fatigue when you have too much of the same thing coming out at once. I think Deep Star 6 was compared at the time unfavorably to The Abyss, as The Abyss is crappier little cousin or something. So I think a lot of people ignored it. It's not as good as The Abyss, I will say that. There's a lot of exposition at the beginning, which I don't really care about. As with a lot of these sort of there's a crew in an isolated situation on a scientific expedition and they can't really get back in contact with the rest of humanity movies. There's too many people at the beginning of the movie because they want the monster to be able to kill off a bunch of the cast members without suddenly leaving you with only one person left. So they have to front load the movie with just too many characters. And they spend all this time in the beginning of the movie, giving you some story and some, well, how do these people feel about each other? What's this guy's attitude problem? Who doesn't he like? Who's also working on the rig with him? I appreciate that they're trying to show, not tell, but they have to spend a lot of time at the beginning of the movie showing us who these characters are, who ultimately aren't even going to make it that far through the movie. So I'm kind of maybe, gloss over a little bit of that, make it a little quicker at the beginning and get us to the dangerous action part and get me to that monster. That's what I want to see, is the monster. You have to wait a long time to see the monster in this movie, but boy, when you finally do get to the part with the monster in it, it's a really nice payoff. It's a great monster. The scene when they finally give you the reveal, what Sean and I like to call full frontal monster, it's a pretty great scene that's got a lot of grody, just stuff going on in it. Again, don't want to say too much because I want you guys to be surprised, but if you like science fiction, action, horror, that combo genre, and especially if you like underwater, definitely see this movie. We really liked it. Like I said, it is a little bit slow at the beginning. They give you too many characters that you don't care about, but once it really gets going, it does get going. And the suspenseful buildup to the actual part where they show you the monster is pretty dang effective and had me feeling a little bit jumpy, even though there weren't like jump scares necessarily. So I also find the kind of like confined environment, either underwater or in space, to be lightly terrifying whenever there's like a hull breach type situation and they get rammed by the monster and start taking on water in their underwater science lab pretty early on in the movie. And boy, I could just feel my heart racing and my anxiety level going up with the like, okay, wait, we're really far underwater, but now the water's coming in here. Type of thing. So that very effective, especially if you have done any amount of time thinking about what type of big insane monsters there might be down in the depths of the ocean that we haven't actually met yet. So Deep Star 6, 1989, recommended if you like any of those things that I just talked about. And that is it for this week's Cinema Club Sunday Roundup. I do know that tonight my kids have totally overrode Sean and I, and we are going to be watching the Sonic the Hedgehog movie finally. So I'll let you guys know what I thought about that next week. Meanwhile, please tell me what you guys have been watching. Always love to hear what you guys have been watching last week, plan to watch next week, recommendations for us, anything like that. All right. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I will be back in a couple days with another episode of my vlog. Until then, take care. I'll see you later.